The night my husband's friends learned I was the secret CEO who just sold my company for $28 million was the same night he stood up at his own birthday dinner and told them he carried our marriage. 10 minutes later, he was staring at a screen filled with bank transfers every dollar I'd quietly sent him for 7 years, while Madison, the woman he confided in, hid behind her champagne glass. But the real twist came earlier at 6 in the morning, when Ethan zipped a suitcase and told me he needed space to think if I was worth staying with. What he didn't know was everything he believed about me was about to detonate. Before I go any further, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever had someone you love look you in the eye and tell you you're not enough. Because if you felt that sting, the kind that burns deep and quiet, you're about to understand exactly how everything in my life flipped overnight. I didn't become invisible overnight. It happened slowly, the way a dimmer switch turns a room dark without anyone noticing when it started. Long before Ethan ever zipped that suitcase, I'd already mastered the art of shrinking myself. I grew up in a cramped house in Tacoma, where the floors creaked and my parents' attention creaked even louder, always bending toward my younger sister Emma. She was the one with piano recitals, glittery birthday cakes, and a scrapbook full of photos, where her smile looked like a commercial. I was background noise, a reliable shadow. One humid August evening, I remember the four of us gathered around the dinner table. The ceiling fan buzzed overhead, wobbling like it might fling a blade into someone's plate. Mom slid a platter of fried chicken to Emma with a warm smile. "Take the drumsticks, sweetie. You love those." I reached for one, slow and hopeful. Mom's hand landed on my wrist without hesitation. "Leave the good pieces for your sister. You're the big one. You can handle the rest." The words weren't sharp, but they carved anyway. I pulled back, took the dry breast piece, and pretended not to notice Emma licking barbecue sauce from her fingers like she'd won something. Back then, I thought fairness was something you earned. I didn't know yet that some people just never see you. In middle school, teachers loved Emma's charm and shrugged at my straight A's. In high school, I won a statewide business competition, my name printed in bold letters on a flyer I carried home in my backpack, heart pounding with pride. "Mom, Dad," I'd said, holding up the flyer, "they want to feature me in the local paper." "That's nice," Mom interrupted. "But Emma got asked to prom by the quarterback." She squealed, hugging my sister like they'd both won a trophy. I folded the flyer quietly. Once, twice, again, until the ink disappeared inside my fist. I swallowed the moment whole, but the taste stayed bitter. College in Seattle felt like a jailbreak. The city smelled like rain and ambition. The sidewalks were filled with caffeine-fueled 20-somethings who believed they could change the world. And for the first time, I wasn't just the older sister. I was Olivia. I worked 2 part-time jobs, barista, tutor, just to keep myself afloat. At night, I interned at a small consulting firm where I learned how disasters really worked. Not the dramatic kind with explosions, but the quiet structural failures: a careless tweet, a leaked email, a CEO who forgot empathy existed. And then I met Ethan. It was a Thursday afternoon at a campus cafe, the kind that smelled like burnt espresso and wet textbooks. I'd been cramming for exams, my brain a fried circuit board, when I heard him behind me complaining about architecture deadlines. "They said design would be creative," he muttered to no one. "Turns out it's mostly suffering and unpaid labor." I turned, and there he was, sketchbook under his arm, dark curls damp from the drizzle outside, nerves and passion mixing in his expression. He sat down without asking, started talking about buildings that could hold people's grief, and somehow his words made architecture sound like therapy. I was drawn in immediately. Back then, he loved that I listened, and I loved that he dreamed. We got married young, 23 and 26, at a vineyard where the leaves were turning gold. Ethan cried during his vows. "I'll always see you," he'd whispered, and I'd believed him so hard it hurt. After the wedding, we moved into a cramped studio in San Francisco because ambition apparently thrives on overpriced rent and existential dread. I started taking freelance crisis jobs, patching reputations, salvaging broken narratives. I did it from our folding table while Ethan chased architecture internships that paid him in experience and the occasional free sandwich. That was the foundation of our life. I worked quietly, he worked visibly, and somewhere between the two I learned how easy it is for people to believe only what they can see. But I didn't know back then that the very thing I hid, the thing I built in silence, would become the weapon that shattered everything. By the time Ethan finished his architecture program, I had already built a reputation as the girl who solved messes no one else wanted to touch. Quietly, invisibly. While other consultants posted victories on LinkedIn, I crafted apologies at midnight, rewrote crisis narratives, and slipped back into the background like smoke. When Ethan struggled to land a paid position, I picked up more clients. I covered rent for months, telling him, "It's temporary. You'll find the right firm." When he couldn't afford the $800 drafting software he needed, I bought it. When his laptop died, I put a new one on my business card. When he panicked over portfolio costs, I paid the designer. He always said, "You're a lifesaver, Liv," but somehow he believed he was surviving on grit alone. The year we finally moved out of the studio, I had saved enough to put a down payment on a modest condo in an older building just off Market Street. It wasn't glamorous. The hallway lights flickered, the elevator groaned, and the plumbing made noises like it was summoning ghosts. But it was ours, or rather mine. My credit, my income, my signature on the dotted line. Ethan spun me around the first night on the balcony, city lights stretching behind him. "You're amazing," he said. "We built this together." I didn't correct him. I didn't tell him the realtor had asked if I wanted to include his name, and I'd paused just long enough for her to understand no. Later, I told myself it was practicality, but another part whispered that I already knew something wasn't balanced. Still, I kept dimming myself. When Jade and I formed Ward and Miller, we worked from my dining table surrounded by takeout containers and sticky notes. Jade was pure fire, fierce, brilliant, allergic to anyone underestimating her. She pushed me hard. "You have to stop hiding," she'd say during late-night work sessions. "You walk like a ghost in your own life." But hiding had become a reflex. In those early years, Ethan would walk into the room while I was handling a crisis call, and I'd mute myself mid-sentence saying, "Just freelance stuff." I acted like I was helping small brands with minor hiccups, when in reality, I was guiding multi-million-dollar companies through PR meltdowns. I was the reason CEOs kept their jobs, why founders survived scandals, why products resurged after catastrophic failures. The more successful I became, the smaller I acted. I didn't notice the shift in Ethan at first, the forced smile when I said I had a busy week. The questions that weren't really questions. "You're still doing the remote work thing? When are you going to pick one career path?" His mother didn't help. Linda treated my work like a hobby, telling anyone who'd listen that Ethan was the true professional of the household. If someone asked me what I did, I'd barely get 2 words out before she'd cut in with, "Oh, she's just freelancing while Ethan builds his architecture career." Ethan never corrected her. One evening at her house over pot roast and forced cheerfulness, Linda said, "You know, Madison is exactly the kind of woman who compliments a man in a demanding field. Driven, polished, focused." She looked right at Ethan when she said compliments like she was matching pieces of a puzzle. I sat there smiling tightly, feeling something in my chest crack just a little. Ethan didn't defend me. He didn't even notice. I didn't know it then, but that tiny crack would spread in ways neither of us could predict. Then Ward and Miller landed our first huge client, a tech company, facing a data breach that could have buried them. We saved them. Quietly, efficiently, surgically. They paid us more in one retainer than I'd made in 2 years at my old job. I wanted to tell Ethan. I wanted him to look at me and finally see the woman he'd married. Instead, when he came home that night buzzing about a possible junior associate position, I closed my laptop, hid the contract beneath a stack of magazines, and said, "Let's celebrate you." I'd been dimming for so long I didn't realize I was disappearing. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't know, was that every quiet compromise, every swallowed victory, every time I chose to stay small, was setting the stage for the night everything would burst into flame. I used to think conflict was something that happened in boardrooms and headlines, not in kitchens and bedrooms. At work, I could spot a brewing disaster 3 emails away. At home, I kept telling myself things were just a rough patch. The first real flare-up came over something stupid. It always does. It was a Tuesday night. I'd just gotten off a video call where a founder had cried because his leaked Slack messages were about to go public. My head was pounding, my jaw tight from holding my voice calm for an hour. I walked into the kitchen and Ethan was standing at the counter holding our credit card statement like it was evidence in a murder trial. "What is this?" he demanded. I blinked at the paper. Software subscriptions, cloud storage, a wire transfer to a cybersecurity contractor. Normal to me. Business expenses, I said, pouring myself water. "For Ward and Miller," he scoffed. "You spent more this month on your little projects than I make in 2 paychecks." The word little lodged in my throat. "You got a pay cut," I reminded him gently. "We talked about this. I told you I'd cover more until things stabilize." "That's not the point," he snapped. "I'm supposed to be the provider. How does it look that my wife is the one swiping the card for everything, like we're a team?" I wanted to say. "Like we're surviving." Instead, I said, "It looks like we're married." His eyes flashed. "You don't get it." He dropped the statement on the counter and walked out, leaving the page fluttering in his wake. My fingers itched to grab a highlighter, circle every line, and annotate the reality he refused to see. Instead, I folded the paper in half, then in half again. I'd learned that trick a long time ago. A week later, his firm hosted a networking mixer on a rooftop downtown. The night air was cool, the city below us buzzing with traffic glasses, clinking laughter, bouncing off glass and steel. I came straight from a client meeting, still in my navy blazer and heels, laptop bag over my shoulder. "This is my wife, Olivia," Ethan told one of the partners, resting a hand on my back. "She works from home. Some consulting stuff." "Some consulting stuff." The partner gave me a polite, vague smile. "That's nice," he said, already turning back to Ethan to discuss a new development in Soma. Later, near the bar, I ended up beside Madison. Up close, her beauty was the curated kind: expensive hair, perfect lipstick, a dress designed to look effortless and costing more than my first car. "So, remote work," she said, sipping her drink. "I would go crazy not having a real office." "I'm in and out of clients' offices all the time," I said. "It's not as glamorous as it sounds." "What kind of clients?" she pressed. I opened my mouth. "Tech companies, mostly dealing with crisis stuff." Ethan cut in, sliding between us with a fresh drink. "Nothing big. She likes staying flexible so she can support my schedule." He said it lightly, like a joke. Madison laughed. I felt something cold bloom in my chest. On the drive home, I stared out the window at the blur of headlights. "You didn't have to make my job sound like a hobby," I said quietly. "I was just simplifying," he replied. "People don't need all the details. People. Or you." I didn't push it. I let the silence thicken until even the GPS voice sounded too loud. The next blow landed at his parents' house. Sunday dinner, pot roast and mashed potatoes, football murmuring from the living room. Linda was in rare form, telling anyone who would listen how Ethan's firm was lucky to have him, how he was going places. George nodded along like a well-trained backup singer. "So, Olivia," Linda said, finally turning her attention to me with the smile that never reached her eyes. "Still doing the little freelance gigs?" I could feel Jade's voice in my head. "Say it. Tell the truth." "I run a crisis management firm," I said. "We work with tech companies handling data breaches." And Linda waved a hand. Right, your computer stuff." She turned back to Ethan. "You know who really impresses me, Madison? That girl has drive. She was telling me about her campaign metrics the other day, Mom." Ethan muttered. "I'm just saying," Linda continued. "A man with your potential needs a partner who matches his energy. Someone as ambitious as he is." She looked straight at me as she said it. I smiled tightly, my nails digging crescents into my palm under the table. I didn't know it at the time, I'd think later, but that was the moment I stopped trying to win her over and started taking notes instead. That night, while he slept, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I kept replaying her sentence, circling the word partner like it was a diagnosis. For the first time, I caught myself wondering, partner for what exactly? The shift between us wasn't an explosion. It was erosion, A slow grinding down of grace, an accumulating resentment he mistook for enlightenment. The next hit came on a Thursday night when he texted me from work team night out. Don't wait up. I had 3 crisis calls stacked back to back, my laptop glowing in the dark like a warning sign. Around 10, Jade sent me a screenshot. A bar, loud lights, Ethan at the center of the group. Chase's caption read, "Some of us carrying more than others. Dead weight slows progress." Underneath, a blurry shot of Ethan laughing, head tipped toward Madison. My stomach tightened. Jade added, "This is what he tells them." I stared at the screen for a long time, then typed back, "I'm sure it's nothing." It wasn't. I felt it in my bones. 2 days later, the argument about groceries detonated. I'd just come home from a meeting where a CEO tried to convince me leaking user data was not that big a deal. Ethan was in the kitchen tossing receipts across the counter. "You spent $600 this week on food," he said sharply. "That was for both of us," I replied, opening the fridge. "And I stocked up on staples." He shook his head, exasperated. "You act like money grows on trees. I can't keep up with your spending." My spending. The absurdity hit me so hard I almost laughed. "Ethan, I covered our mortgage this month. And utilities. And your software renewal." "That's not the point," he snapped. "It's emasculating. You don't understand what it feels like." I didn't argue. I just stood there, hands braced on the counter, absorbing the sting. He wanted the illusion of providing more than the reality of partnership. The next escalation came at Tyler's house. His wife Emily had invited us for a casual dinner. Simple food, warm lighting, the kind of environment that should relax people. Instead, I watched Ethan perform like he was auditioning for a role only he understood. He talked loudly about his project pipeline, claimed he was being considered for a major museum concept, and brushed off any mention of setbacks. When Emily complimented our condo, Ethan smiled and said, "We saved for years. It's ours, equal effort." I felt the words land like a bruise. Later in the kitchen, Emily handed me a towel to dry dishes. "You okay?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Just tired." She hesitated. "Tyler. He thinks Ethan's been under pressure. The firm cut budgets. And when guys feel insecure sometimes, they rewrite stories to feel in control." Rewrite stories. That line sat with me long after we left. A few days later, the deepest cut came disguised as a compliment. I'd spent the entire morning handling a founder meltdown. His old college messages had resurfaced, and he was spiraling. I'd barely eaten. My head throbbed. Ethan came home early, smelling faintly of whiskey. "Had a great lunch," he said, kicking off his shoes. "Big team meeting. Madison came too." I looked up. "How was it?" He grinned a little too wide. "She said I'm one of the most driven guys she's met. That I'm going to make a name in this city. That I need people around me who match that energy." The implication sat heavy between us. "What did you say?" I asked, voice even. He shrugged. "I told her I haven't thought about it. But maybe she's right." There was no cruelty in his tone. That almost made it worse. It was casual dismissal, the kind that reveals truth, not anger. Later that week, his parents invited us again. Same roast, same ritual, same favoritism coated in politeness. But this time something shifted. Linda leaned in during dinner, eyes bright. "Madison stopped by the office," she said. "She's remarkable, sharp, focused. Ethan, she reminds me of your drive. You two understand each other." Silence. Then she added, "Not everyone is built for the pace you need." Everyone knew she meant me. Something inside me clicked. Not anger, not grief, just clarity. I suddenly saw the breadcrumbs leading to one inevitable truth: Ethan wasn't drifting away. He'd been preparing an escape. My dimming hadn't protected him, it had enabled him. The final blow came quietly. One evening I walked into the living room and found him on the phone, voice slow pacing. He didn't hear me enter. "I just don't know if this marriage fits anymore," he whispered. "She's comfortable. I need someone who pushes me. Someone ambitious." A pause. "No, you're not overstepping," he murmured. I appreciate the honesty. He was talking to Madison. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just backed away slowly, each step a severing thread. That night, I lay awake watching the outline of the blinds against the ceiling and finally admitted to myself that something fundamental had cracked beyond repair. When he eventually zipped the suitcase at dawn, claiming his friends believed he could do better, I wasn't shocked. Betrayal rarely arrives as a surprise. It's an accumulation, a slow stacking of choices, and mine had always been to stay silent. Not anymore. The night of Ethan's birthday felt like the city itself was holding its breath. San Francisco was washed in a cold bluish glow, the kind that makes every window look like an interrogation lamp. I arrived at Aveline and Comey early, my heels echoing through the quiet hallway as a server led me toward the private dining room. The air smelled like lemon zest and butter-soft music drifting from the main dining hall. Everything looked polished, expensive, deliberate, exactly what this night needed to be. The staff had set up the projector just as I requested. On the white screen, frozen in stark clarity, was the first slide of my presentation, a simple title, "What You Never Saw." I stood there a moment staring at those words. They felt like a confession, a warning, and a promise wrapped into one. I adjusted the neckline of my navy dress, smoothed my hair, and inhaled slowly. When I exhaled, I felt something inside me settle and anchor a center. Tonight wasn't about revenge. Not entirely. It was about truth reclaiming its shape. Guests trickled in, one by one. Tyler greeted me first, loosening his tie, smiling with genuine warmth. "You look incredible, Liv," he said. "This place is unreal." I thanked him and moved to pour him a drink, keeping my expression calm. Chase and Dylan arrived next, loud as always, smelling of expensive cologne and cheap ego. Madison walked in moments later, her silhouette sharp against the candlelit room. She wore a sleek black dress, hair perfectly curled, lips glossy and confident. When her eyes landed on me, something flickered, confusion, maybe unease, but she recovered quickly. "This is impressive," she said, scanning the room. "It should be," I replied, meeting her gaze without blinking. Ethan arrived last. Late, of course. He stepped inside wearing a charcoal suit that fit too well for someone who had supposedly needed time to think. The room erupted in cheerful greetings, but his eyes stayed on me, searching my face for warmth that wasn't there. "Wow," he said, glancing around. "You really went all out." "For you," I answered. "Please, everyone have a seat." The table filled with laughter and light chatter, cutlery clinking softly. I didn't sit. Instead, I stepped to the end of the table where the remote waited. The room dimmed slightly as the candles flickered, stretching everyone's shadows against the wall. I felt the tension shift as people realized something was coming. "I'd like to start with a few words," I said, voice steady. "About truth, about effort, about the stories we tell and the ones we silence." Ethan frowned, shifting in his seat. "Olivia, what?" I clicked the remote. The Warden Miller logo filled the screen behind me. "This," I said, "is my company." The room went silent. Even the candles seemed to freeze. For the last 3 years, while many of you believed I worked from home doing small freelance gigs, I was building a crisis management firm that handled some of the biggest scandals in Silicon Valley. I clicked again. Revenue charts, growth curves. Last year alone, we cleared $6 million. Chase let out a low whistle. Madison's smile faltered. Ethan stared at the slide as if it were written in another language. "And this," I said, tapping the next slide, "is our acquisition offer. $28 million. Half of that belongs to me." Ethan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "You never told me," he finally managed. "You never asked," I replied. I let the silence sharpen before clicking again. The screen shifted to show bank statements, transfers, payments, mortgage receipts. This, I continued, is what I contributed to our life. Mortgage payments, utilities, your professional memberships, your software, your equipment, your shortfalls after your pay cut. Tyler's head snapped toward Ethan. "You told us you were carrying her," he said, voice low. "You said she didn't contribute." The next slide was the deed to our condo. My name. Only mine. Ethan moved into my home, I said. He's been living here under the illusion that we built it together. Ethan pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. This is insane, he said. You blindsided me. In front of everyone, I clicked again before he could continue. The final slide appeared screenshots of messages between him and Madison. Madison. You could do better than someone who just sits at home. Ethan. I know. I settled. I need someone more on my level. A gasp rippled across the table. Madison's face drained of color. She gripped her glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, panicked. Those are taken out of context, he stammered. You shouldn't have. Context, I said quietly. You left me at 6 a.m. because your friends convinced you I wasn't enough. But the truth is you built your confidence on stories you made up about me. The room shifted, loyalty cracking like thin ice. Tyler stood. Dude, he said to Ethan, you lied to all of us. I lifted my champagne glass, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. So here's my toast, I said, to Ethan, the man who thought he'd outgrown me while living off everything I built. I took a slow sip, crisp, bitter. Happy birthday. Then I set the glass down and walked out, heels hitting the floor like a metronome counting down the end of an era. The muffled chaos behind me, voices rising, chairs scraping, Ethan calling my name, faded with each step. And for the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking. I was rising. I didn't look back when I stepped out onto the street. The night air hit me like cold water, sharp enough to clear whatever fog was left from 7 years of silence. Behind me, through the tall windows of Aveline and Como, voices were rising. Ethan demanding explanations. Madison crying Tyler, telling him to sit down and stop blaming everyone but himself. I kept walking until the sound faded into nothing but the hum of traffic. When I reached the curb, I finally let myself breathe. Really breathe. My hands were steady, my heartbeat slow, almost peaceful. It surprised me. I thought I'd be shaking. I thought I'd feel guilt, anger, something burning, but there was only stillness, like the world had clicked back into its rightful alignment. My phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from Ethan, 6 from his mother, 1 from a number I didn't recognize. I didn't open any of them. Not yet. Not tonight. Instead, I called Jade. She picked up on the first ring. Did you do it? She asked. It's done. There was a long exhale on her end, followed by a quiet, wicked laugh. Good. Then tomorrow we get to work. Work. You think the dinner was the finale, Olivia? That was the opening act. I leaned against a street lamp, watching headlights glide past like slow-moving constellations. What do you mean? I asked, even though a part of me already knew. Logan's press schedule goes live at midnight, she said. Feature stories, podcast interviews, panels, they're all lining up. The world is about to meet the real you, the woman you kept hidden for 7 years. I closed my eyes. The weight of that truth settled over me, not heavy but firm, like armor finally being fastened into place. And Ethan, I asked. That Jade said is the part you'll like. Caroline just emailed me. She drafted the preliminary divorce proposal. Clean, surgical, untouchable. He won't see it coming. A quiet smile pulled at my mouth, colder than anything I'd felt in that dining room. They all underestimated you, Jade added. Now they're about to learn why nobody survives underestimating a crisis manager. I opened my eyes, watching the city glow under the streetlights. They thought they embarrassed me tonight, I whispered. But they just handed me the perfect stage. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, or like you had to shrink yourself just to keep the peace, make sure you hit subscribe. Because stories like mine don't end with one dinner or one breakup. They echo, they ripple. They reveal who people really are when the lights come on. And trust me, this won't be the last time someone tries to downplay a woman who quietly builds an empire. So stay here with me. There's more coming, and you don't want to miss what happens next.